Hi, I'm Paul Dreyfus, National Program Coordinator for Elders Promote the Vote. This is a partnership between two organizations committed to increasing voter turnout among strong environmentalists. I'll give a brief introduction to the initiative, and then Peter will go into more detail about how and why this works to influence the priorities of elected officials in a pro-climate, pro-environment direction. Just a little background on how we got here with this partnership. Leading up to the 2018 elections, a ragtag team of about 50 ECA members and friends helped the Environmental Voter Project by contacting, mostly by text, more than 200,000 low voting, strong environmentalists and generated several thousand votes that would not have been cast otherwise. Now with the 2020 election looming on the horizon, ECA has made a strong commitment to voter outreach. ECA's National Coordinating Council has designated Elders Promote the Vote and our partnership with the Environmental Voter Project as one of our best opportunities to move the needle on public policy while staying true to our nonpartisan status as a charitable not-for-profit organization. We plan to double or quadruple our volunteer workforce and contact more than 1 million low voting environmentalists and generate at least 10,000 votes that would not have otherwise been cast. We feel these numbers can go much higher, but this is a good start. Between now and November 2019, there will be a few local and statewide elections for us to support. Then the work will be steady and increasingly intense as we turn the corner into 2020. So why is this initiative important, and why has ECA made such a strong commitment to it? Well, research shows that there are up to 15 million so-called super environmentalists out there who don't vote regularly, and Peter will go into some depth about what we mean by super environmentalists and who we're actually targeting and why. Experience shows that voter outreach can reach millions of these voters and result in tens of thousands of pro-environment votes that would not have been cast otherwise. And we know that elected officials pay close attention to voters' priorities and to what the characteristics are of the people who actually turn out to vote. So the more super environmentalists that vote, the more likely we'll see pro-climate policies. And we feel we're at a moment of opportunity where there's intense public attention, both on climate and the environment and on the upcoming 2020 election. So this is a great opportunity to engage voters who might not have been voted up till now. So why are we starting so early with still about 20 months to go before the 2020 election? First of all, this is a different kind of voter outreach campaign. We're trying to change voter behavior, not to change anyone's mind about climate change. So we know from the research that if people vote in 2019, they're more likely to vote in 2020. Also, if more strong environmentalists vote in these isolated elections in 2019, that sends a message through survey research to the 2020 candidates that voters really do care about the environment. Also, we're trying to gear up for a very high impact, high volume effort going into the 2020 races. So we have an opportunity now to gain experience and get really good at this voter outreach work. So just a very quick rundown on how this is going to work. And again, Peter is going to go into a lot more depth on this. Environmental Voter Project has done a lot of analysis to develop target lists of strong environmentalists who are not very good voters. So they will provide us with texting and calling apps that we can load with these target lists so that we have the opportunity to outreach to the appropriate voters where we're more likely to have an impact. Our volunteers will receive orientation and training and will provide whatever support that they need to constructively participate in the outreach effort. And we want to do this as kind of with a teamwork model where our ECA chapters form Elders Promote the Vote teams to recruit and support volunteers, and that each team would have a team leader who would have a certain level of experience and expertise in how to do this and can help others with it. So what results can we expect? We know from our previous work and from environmental voters research that it's realistic. Well, we hope to engage 100 to 200 volunteers. We have somewhere between 50 and 100 folks engaged right now, but not necessarily all registered into the system and trained, but we think we can get there. This would mean that we could contact at least 1 million voters, and that would translate into at least 10,000 or more votes that would be cast by strong environmentalists that would not have otherwise been cast. So at this point, I want to turn the presentation over to Peter, and I'll stop right there.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was fantastic, and I hope folks don't mind if I'm a little repetitive to what Paul already said, because I want to make sure that we really drive home just how I think effective this collaboration is, and why we're doing it. It worked out so well last year, and we here at the Environmental Voter Project are sincerely thrilled to carry this partnership forward in 2019 and 2020. So I do want to go over why Environmental Voter Project exists in the first place. And the real simple reason is that voters do not prioritize environmental issues, as Paul has already indicated. This is a real problem. Now, in the 2016 general election, we conducted a national survey, and we asked people what their first and second most important political priorities were. And you can see at the very top here, we see national security and terrorism, the economy and jobs, immigration, healthcare. We've got a few others, and then we get to the bottom here, and oops, there we go. We see climate change and the environment. 2% of likely voters, and that's the critical phrase, likely voters, 2% of likely voters prioritize climate change and the environment as of 2016. Another 2% consider it to be their second most important political priority. So this is bad, and it's bad for a few different reasons, right? So first of all, campaigns only target likely voters. If I'm running for US Senate, there's no way that I'm going to try to reach out to an unlikely voter and ask for that person's support or give that person election reminders, because my resources need to go where they need to go, which is to the likely or the pretty likely voters. As counterintuitive as it seems, campaigns legitimately do only have limited time and money. So that means that these unlikely voters in the world are not going to be targeted. And then, of course, they're not going to turn out to vote, and it's cyclical. Another issue is that politicians only poll likely voters. Because campaigns and outside groups only target the folks that we have been talking about, the likely voters, they also only poll likely voters to see what issues they care about. This is because our elected officials, God bless them, are some of the most rational creatures on earth, and they want to get reelected, real simple. So they're going to put their policy priorities where the priorities of the voters are, not where the people are. So likely voters' opinions are going to end up being far more important to politicians than the opinions of non-voters. This is really, really bad news for the environment. I don't think I need to explain to anybody who's listening to this that every politician knows that likely voters rank environmental issues among their lowest concerns. So it's a supply and demand issue. If voters aren't demanding environmental leadership, there's absolutely no incentive for politicians to supply that leadership. We've seen this over the previous decades, and unless something changes, we're going to see it going forward as well. But I don't mean to sound all down about our chances in the environmental movement here when it comes to policy, because we also have a big opportunity that come from these numbers. Because It's not just that people don't care about the environment, it's that environmentalists don't vote at a rate that they're supposed to be voting at. In the 2014 midterms, for instance, 15.78 million environmentalists just did not turn out to vote in the general election. And this heat map of the non-voting environmentalists around the country shows some really promising opportunities, because what it says is that a lot of these people are easy to contact. They're urbanized. We can canvass them. We can call them. Critically, we can text them regardless of where they are. We can send them digital ads. We can email them. We can send them direct mail. What this is saying, what this heat map is telling us, is that there are nearly 16 million environmentalists, people who prioritize the environment, who did not vote in 2014, that we can get to vote. And anyone who's ever tried to talk to someone, if I've ever tried to talk to someone about climate change and they don't believe that it's a thing, they don't understand the science, or they refuse to accept the reality of what's happening, a 30-second conversation or even an hour-long conversation probably will not change their mind. That's because persuasion is hard. So what we're doing at EVP here is ignoring the persuasion side of things. We want to focus on these 16 million environmentalists across the country who are already believing what we do, but not voting, and we just want to get them to vote. So what we're looking for is a long-term shift in the electorate. It's not just about the next election. It's not just about specific candidates or even causes. Believe it or not, the Environmental Voter Project is nonpartisan. We don't ever talk about issues. We don't endorse candidates. And we don't do these things because it's really kind of useless if we're talking to people who already believe what we believe. What we want to do instead is shift the polling numbers. We want to increase the share of the electorate that prioritizes the environment. And how do we do this? Well, first we need to identify these folks. Then we need to mobilize them. Then we need to make sure that voting turns into a habit. So the way we identify these voters is with big data analytics. We work with an organization that uses predictive modeling, and they're able to tell us with about an 89% confidence rate whether or not any given individual in one of our targeted states prioritizes environmental issues. So the Environmental Voter Project is in Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. And in our database, we have this behavioral modeling that can tell us 9 times out of 10 whether or not someone is going to prioritize the environment. And we haven't even talked to these people. It's just based on a whole bunch of data and a whole bunch of data analysis. And I can tell you it's really, really effective. So once we know whether or not someone is an environmentalist, we'll pop them into our database and we'll look at their voting records. Now, I already mentioned that most organizations focus on the good voters. Well, EVP focuses on the bad voters, the people who are routinely ignored. So what we want to do is turn these people into really good voters. So we're going to mobilize them. And we do that using what I already mentioned. We canvass, we call, we mail, and we send digital ads to all of these folks. And we text. This is what we're going to be talking about a lot today. But the mobilization is using something called social pressure. Now, EVP considers ourselves something of a lab. We always want to be turning voters out, but we always want to make sure we're being as effective as possible. So we're constantly testing messages and strategies and different mediums to get these folks out to the polls. And what we found is that something called social pressure is one of the most effective tools in our arsenal. Social pressure is based on the fact that most people tend to view voting not necessarily as a way to make a difference, as cynical as that sounds, but instead as a way to fulfill a very basic civic obligation. So put another way, if I'm a bad voter and one of you comes up to me and you say, "Hey, Peter, I know you're not a very good voter," I might feel annoyed or embarrassed enough to actually become a better voter in the future. And it doesn't always have to be that overt. there are often very subtle phrases and strategies that we can use to get people to think about voting as a very active process. And EVP is lucky in that we always take a control group aside. Because we're not always focused on the next election, we can take this control group aside so we can compare our results. Traditionally, what we found is that depending on the type of election that we're dealing with, whether it be a primary, a local election, a midterm, a special, or a presidential, and depending on the ways that we're contacting voters, we're typically able to bump up voting rates by anywhere between 0.5 and about 5.1%. Now, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when we're talking about the 2.5 million voters, for instance, that EVP focused on turning out last year in 2018, that really starts to add up to tens of thousands of voters. So once we get our targeted vote, right? So we want to essentially graduate these voters out of the environmental voter project. So they're so consistent at getting to the polls that they start showing up on the radar of all the other voter contact organizations. The habit reinforcement is very important for us. So I do want to say again that we turn voters out for every election. As Paul mentioned, the most effective way that we have to create a voter in 2020 is to create that voter in 2019. I can't emphasize that enough. Right now, millions and millions of people are having elections every month, tens of millions of people, and so few people are actually voting because so few organizations are doing voter contact. EVP has elections virtually every week. We're always turning voters out. There's always somebody who has a municipal election or a special congressional election. And it's important to us that we get people to vote in every single election. So real quick, I want to repeat that we're focused on a whole lot of things. We're always trying out different strategies for canvassing, calling, texting, and mail. We're really proud of our digital outreach. This allows us to target virtually everyone in our universe individually to their computer, and allows us to communicate with them and get them out to vote in a way that was impossible up to even just 4 or 5 years ago. I want to say again that we don't make endorsements because we're not trying to elect particular candidates. There are a lot of really good groups out there who are already doing that work, and we don't need to repeat that. We simply focus on the absolute best ways to get environmentalists to become consistent voters, like a big data version of Rock the Vote, but for environmentalists. So I want to head back to texting. This is what we've started doing really, especially in the last year and a half or so here at EVP. It's really exciting, and it's what, it's what I think is going to be a really effective tool both in 2019 and 2020. Now, we do text messaging with a platform called Hustle. Hustle allows volunteers to communicate very, very rapidly with voters. And importantly, it allows EVP to communicate with the hard-to-reach voters of the world. This is especially true with younger voters who are very mobile and moving around a lot. And it's also true with voters of color and voters of lower socioeconomic status, just because they may not have home phones. They may be more mobile themselves and not have a static address that shows up in our database. Their cell phone numbers are much less apt to change. Importantly, it also encourages real conversations with environmental supporters, and it's significantly faster than traditional phone banking, and it gets a much better response rate than emails. So we're not going to do a real training right now, but I'm going to leave that to Paul. He's the expert. But I do want to offer a little bit of information here. First of all, we're not talking about writing out text messages on our phone. That takes a long, long time. And I tell you what, I'm not young enough for that to be very fun. Instead, what we do is we here at EVP create a message like one that you're seeing on the right here. We'll create this message, and the voter's name and the volunteer's name is automatically going to get populated into that message. And I'll tell you what that means. This person, let's see, Kate, was texting Juan about a Philadelphia election on November 7th. Kate did not write anything out. All she did was push send, and this was sent. And then the moment she sent this text, a new text would have appeared with Kate's name and a different voter in here. Kate pushes send again. She just pushes send over and over and over again. And so what that means is that you can text more than 1,000 voters in an hour. You can contact 1,000 people in an hour, and almost every single one of those people is going to see that text message. They're going to see your note. Now, a lot of people ignore us, and that's fine. But what we found based on our testing is that we've seen an increased voting rate of between 0.6 and 1.1% from a text. That means you can create 5, 10 texts in, excuse me, you can create 5 or 10 voters in a single hour. That's really, really powerful. Last year in 2018, the Environmental Voter Project altogether sent 3.9 million texts. You can send messages both via your smartphone or with your computer, which it's absolutely a matter of personal preference. And I do want to note as well that your personal phone number will never show up on anyone else's phone. This is an app. So what's going to show up on the other person's phone is a phone number that's local to where they are. So if Kate texted Juan, what Juan would see is a number that appears to be coming from the Philadelphia area. So I really want to thank everyone for participating in this, and like I said, I'm really excited, and we're all excited for this collaboration. Paul and everyone at ECA have been just amazing to work with. We're sincerely looking forward to working more with folks in the future, and I think we're going to be able to make a pretty dramatic impact in 2019 and especially in 2020.
Thank you, Peter. We feel really privileged to be working with you and your colleagues at Environmental Voter Project. You're doing really breakthrough work, and we have a lot of high expectations and enthusiasm for this partnership. So I just want to talk about what the next steps are for getting engaged with this project. I know that various people are different stages of readiness. So just the general flow of things is that we want you to sign up for the project at eldersclimateaction.org, and right after this meeting, I will be sending a follow-up email with all the relevant contact information and listing out these next steps as well. Then once you sign up through Elders Climate Action, we want you to get started on the Hustle app, and we'll send you very specific instructions for that. And we're always available for your questions. If you want to schedule some time to get the startup piece done, we can do that, or you may be able to do it with the written instructions. And I just want to note that, believe it or not, the hardest part of this whole process is just getting registered and logged on. After that, it's pretty intuitive to do the texting once you've seen the live demo and tried it a few times. So it's just, we really want to help you get over the hump and get going on this. And also, once you gain a little experience with this, as I said before, we want to have a team model for this. So please consider becoming a team leader and perhaps inviting friends, members of your family, members of your chapter, whomever, to be part of this exciting project. I have my whole family enrolled at this point. And then just carve out a small amount of time or a large amount of time to text, and you'll be amazed how fast the numbers rack up. And just the last thing is, thank you so much for your interest and being part of this, and we really look forward to working with you. Here's my contact info on the screen, but we will also send you this in an email. Thank you very much.